Hello. It's very nice to be invited to talk about bee farming at Tradex. You're obviously here. I'm quite surprised by the turnout here. I'm very impressed. You're obviously here because you're interested in finding out more about bee farming, right? It's not raining outside or anything like that. Okay. What sort of hive numbers have we got in the room? How many people have got 50 hives or more? Some? Couple of hands up. 20 hives or more? Okay. Fewer than that, but still interested in what goes on? Yeah. Okay. Right, that helps me place it. Let's have a look at my contents slide. Right, I'm going to talk to you on those points there. What I'm not going to do is teach you how to do commercial beekeeping in the next 40 minutes. I'm going to go through and talk about what commercial beekeeping looks like in the UK, what some of the different outputs are, some of the different models that people run on, but I can't go into all the detail about how we manage our bees and how we do this and where we get equipment from and blah, blah, blah. The bee farmers have got a stall down in the big trade hall, and what I'm hoping to do is get through this quite quickly, and then we can open up to questions at the end. And there's various bee farmers dotted around in the room, so you'll get different perspectives as well as my own in answer to those questions. So this is what I want to go through. I'm also talking about the Bee Farmers Association, because it's a very good beekeeping organisation. It is by beekeepers for beekeepers. It's very different to some of the other organisations. It's small, but it's very capable. And it's got a very good ethos, which is supporting the commercial beekeepers. But we'll get on to that. So, the first thing, two answers to the question of what is bee farming. The likely one is just beekeeping on a larger scale. And of course, where you are tends to affect what you define as being on a larger scale. In the UK, we tend to think of anything of 100 hives or more as bee farming in some sense, whether it's full-time or part-time, depends on the scale. Europe, of course, defines things slightly differently. They tend to consider that once somebody's got up to 150 hives, that they are bee farmers. And the Americans like to do everything bigger, so they think anything under 3,000 is just a hobby. Quite how you manage a 2,800 colony hobby is beyond me. But what we see here as well, bee farming, when you're doing it as a sideline, isn't about suddenly you reach 100 colonies and things start to happen. You're working your way up to that. You're building up to 40 colonies, 50 colonies, 60, 80, and to wherever you want or need to take your beekeeping to. So the second definition is that you're beekeeping for a profit. How many of you have been in the trade hall this morning? Yes. And spent something? Yes. How many of you have had your shopping paid for by your bees? And your holidays paid for by your bees? And your salary paid for? And your mortgage? Yeah. That's where it starts to get sticky, if you'll pardon the pun. But we're trying to keep bees for a profit. And in the UK, with the UK weather, that can be difficult. It isn't shooting fish in a barrel. But there are 400 plus beekeepers in this country that are making a living out of their bees. So it can be done. Each bee farmer has a different model. You have to find your niche. You have to work out what you can do, and you have to work out what your customer wants. Whether your customer is a large bottling plant that wants to buy honey in drums and bottle it onwards, or whether your customer wants to buy 1 or 2 nuclei, or whether your customer's a farm shop that wants to buy 48 jars of honey at a time. You've got to develop your niche of what you produce and find your customers and make sure what you produce appeals to your customers. There's 5. I was just having a panic there trying to update my jigsaw puzzle and I couldn't get it done in time. There's 5 strands. I was politely reminded by one of the other bee farmers earlier on today. The 5th one, which isn't up there, is paid pollination. There is paid pollination work in this country. It tends to be localized to certain areas, but it does pay. And something in the region of £50 a colony for springtime pollination, ooh, hang on, that seems like good money at the start of the season. Of course, you don't get something for nothing. There's work involved in that. It's not just planting hives there as they come out of winter. And alongside the paid pollination, we've got the production of bees. Colonies, nukes, queens, whatever format, if you like, you want to sell those produced bees in. And if you look at all of the people in there that are making money out of us lot, the equipment suppliers, nearly all of them started off as beekeepers and moved into some of them all the way, some of them part the way, into becoming equipment manufacturers and suppliers. And there's obviously a niche there which is supporting a lot of people at the moment and doing very well. So every bee farmer has got something somewhere on a number of these, which is what they're doing, what brings in the money. And the other thing, of course, is don't be reliant on just one income stream. So think about having different strands to your business so that you can weather one area of demand dropping or one area of production having a problem. Probably timely to talk about who are bee farmers, what do they look like? I'm one of them. Actually, father and son team. My father's down there at the front. There's a few others lurking in the room here. As I said, I think our count is about 460, something like that, known commercial beekeepers in the UK. They have between 40 and 3,500. There are beekeepers in this country running the thousands of hives, but it's probably that many, if I'm absolutely honest with you. People like Quince Honey Farm, Murray McGregor up in Scotland, Willie Robson, Cambridge Honey Farm, those sort of really big family enterprises that have been running for generations. Most of the bee farmers are in the 50 to 300 hives category, either running it as a sideline to something else or as a small one-man, one-person, full-time business. And in total, we think the bee farmers represent about 65,000 hives. And that's a real number, not one of these sort of Greek accounting things that gets quoted occasionally, that have we really got 274,000 colonies in this country? I don't quite believe that one. This is one of our bee farmers, the shy and retiring John Mellis, who I think is shy and retiring somewhere here in the room. He's up in Dumfriesshire. And his big thing is Scottish heather honey, his niche. That's what he produces, the customer wants it and will pay very good money for it. And John's running between 300 and 400 colonies on his own. Every year when I see him, he says, oh, cut the numbers down this year. It's getting a bit much, I'll cut the numbers down. And every year I then say, oh, how many you got now? Oh, I didn't manage, I sold a few, but I made a few as well. So he's a classic bee farmer that does it for the love of it, and it happens to pay. He loves the job. But it's a nice outfit that he's got. Very nice facilities that he's built up. Every year that he's made a profit from his honey sales, he's invested it in extracting equipment. And one of the things you can do within the Bee Farmers Association is advertise equipment for sale, find other people that are selling the more specialised equipment, and you too can slowly upgrade and improve your processing facilities. Another one down closer to me, I didn't explain, I'm in Devon. This is Robert Field here, who's based, well, his bees are based on Salisbury Plain. A lovely habitat for bees, really is a special habitat. And this is his new extracting facility that the bee farmers went and had a look around. So if you're wondering who all the tourists are, that's other bee farmers. So looking, bloody hell, that must have cost a packet. Oh, I'm not sure if I'd have one of them. But we do this. One of the things about the Bee Farmers Association is we are all competitors who cooperate and support each other. It's a strange little mindset, and I think it's because we are few and far between and we understand the rigours of the job. We understand that it's not just 9 to 5, but we will help each other and we welcome each other into our operations. And one of the great things the Bee Farmers does is they have a spring jolly. 3 days away somewhere where they go on a bus and they go and look round bee farms. Now, it sounds like a busman's holiday, but actually it is so educational because you get to talk to so many people that you see once or twice a year, and then you go and look at 2 or 3 operations and see, would this work for me? Oh, I like how he's done that. I never would have thought of that. Ah, not sure about that bit of equipment. And then you find out about the stuff that they bought that never really worked for them, that sort of thing. So it works really nicely. So this was one of the tours of looking at Robert's facility there. Robert's running, I think last count was about 600 or 700 colonies. And he's got some help. He's got some staff working with him on that, because you can only do so much on your own. I don't know how these Americans manage their 3,000 hobby hives, but there you go. So, looking at hive numbers, generally what we're seeing is this sort of tiering to the membership of the bee farmers. So the 40 to 100 hives is very popular. The 101 to 250 hives is very popular. And this is basically the sort of enterprise which is based around one person running it and doing most of the work, possibly with some assistance. And they're doing that as their full-time job. Once you get above about the 250 mark, you're looking at getting employed help through the season. And then when you get up to the big numbers, you're looking at staffing, because you're actually in a big business there. You think about it, there's only so many hives that you can go out and inspect, however slick you are with your inspections. And sometimes you need 3 or 4 or 5 beekeepers out there doing the inspection to keep on top of things. As I said, most of the bee farming in this country is done at around these sort of levels, up to around the 300 hives. But people are making a living out of that. And this is one of our members up in Yorkshire. This is in his yard. Each of those drums is 330 kilos, give or take, when it's full. And if you were to count them up, that would represent 40 tons of honey. And that's his sort of moderate crop. If he has a good year, it could easily be double that. And he does run just for honey production. And his customer is a large bottling company. You can probably guess the name of them. And that's his business model. And it works for him and it works for his sons that are employed in the business. Right down at the far end, most of the members are concerned about presenting their honey in glass jars, wholesale, in glass, to retailers who have the shop, and they will stand there and wait for the customer to buy it. And what you see as you look where you want to be on this scale, there's an awful lot more fuss and fiddle, if you like, of getting that honey nicely presented in glass jars, labelled, packed in 12s or 24s and delivered around retailers. But you're getting yourself that much closer to the customer's money, because your retailer's going to want to take at least 30% of that shelf price to cover their costs. Their cut, basically, on that transaction. But if you go back to somebody that's selling in bulk like this, the bulk honey price is going to be much less. He hasn't got all the faff of bottling it and delivering it and things like that, managing all those customers. He's got 1 or 2 big customers, but he's probably getting, I'm guessing, £2.20 a pound, something like that, given recent prices. Some years that drops even to £1.60 a pound. So you ain't getting the sort of prices that you're getting for good honey in glass. And of course, the local honey price that the local market will support does depend to a degree on the area that you're in. Do you have a strong tourist trade? Do you have a strong regional identity like Scottish heather honey, for instance, or Yorkshire Moors heather honey, or something like that that you can actually pitch to people? The question people say, how can I make a profit out of this? Because this is a hobby and it takes up an awful lot of time and an awful lot of cash. How can I actually make this profitable? And there's 2 routes, principally, fundamentally. One is that you go for economies of scale. You're doing more, but with less diversity, less variation, and therefore you can do more efficiently. So up your number of hives. Make sure your hives are all the same pattern. People have done it. They've started off with 40 nationals, they've bought 80 commercials, and somebody's selling some Langstroths, and they end up in this sort of mishmash of different box patterns and sizes. If you can, whatever one you pick, try and standardise on one sort. Bearing in mind, of course, that if you want to sell bees on the comb to amateur beekeepers, shall we say, as nukes, they're going to want to buy those on national frames. They aren't really going to want to buy them off you on Langstroth or commercial frames. So choose your hives according to what you're going to do. This is another of our members in Yorkshire, the chap in the hat here, Mark. Lovely shed he's got, and this was in March time. This was all his equipment, cleaned, palletised, ready to go. And there's foundation and frames in all of those boxes ready to go out on the bees. He's the most organised bee farmer I have ever seen, because I've probably got a few boxes left to tidy up, and my shed's almost like that. No, it's chaos, isn't it, Dad? He's talking. But lovely, it shows you all of his equipment is uniform. He hasn't got a problem of getting the right size of brood box, or the right size of queen excluder, or the right size of clearer board when he needs it. It's all there. Pull it off the shelf. Use it. Keep it on the truck. Use it as you need it. And the other side of this is the efficient handling. If you're still extracting in your kitchen, the idea of efficiently handling honey is probably some sort of pipe dream, because you know what it's like. It takes over the kitchen for a week and every surface gets sticky. And how does the telephone get sticky? That's the one that always gets me. But honey just spreads. And so not only have you got to be efficient in your handling of your colonies, you've got to be efficient in handling the produce. And as I said earlier, a wise bee farmer is reinvesting their profits in processing equipment. These bottling machines are lovely, because you sat there with your little tap on the bottom of your bottling tank, and you count. You will wait longer when you've closed the tap for the drip to finish than it takes to fill the jar to wait. These machines just squirt out what's needed, wait half a second, and turn the turntable to the next jar. It's about 4 seconds to fill, onto the next jar. And you stand there, you're putting jars on and lidding and taking jars off at the speed that the machine is running. And it's great, it's marvellous. Problem is, once you've got that luxury, you start to begrudge sitting there putting each label on by hand. And the back label and the front label and the top label and things like that. So you start then dreaming about another good honey year when you can buy yourself a labelling machine to go alongside the bottling machine. And that's principally what you're doing, is you're moving bottlenecks around. You'll have an uncapping bottleneck, or you'll have an extracting bottleneck, or a bottling, or a labelling, or something like that. In the processing of honey, as we grow, we just move bottlenecks. We just change where the frustration is in the process. But we get there. I talked about getting close to your customer. The way I started out, and the way a lot of smaller scale bee farmers start out, is literally the farmer's market stall. And you learn very important lessons from this, because you are talking directly to your retail customer. You find out very quickly what they like and what they don't like, the questions they want answered by your labelling and your packaging. Is it local? Is it raw? Is it organic? All of these sort of questions come up. And it's an invaluable learning experience. So take the opportunity, if you can, get out there and see what your customer wants. You will find out as well what price they'll tolerate for things and what products they're not interested in. There's no value in coming up with the perfect propolis soap if nobody wants to buy propolis soap. If everybody wants to buy local honey with an attractive label, go down that route, pursue it. But the market stall is an extremely good way of going from that small scale, testing the water and finding out what works, what really works, and what the customer prefers. I've even done experiments when I couldn't decide whether to go with the normal sort of round jars or hex jars. I just put them side by side on the table. Same label, same price, see which one the customer picks. And counterintuitively, they pick the round jars 2 to 1 compared to the hexagons. I thought they'd go for the hexagons all the time because I like the hexagon connotation, but I think they've got wise to this fact you can never quite get your spoon into the corners. So, migratory beekeeping comes into this. As a sort of small-scale beekeeper, an amateur beekeeper, you're used to be having your hives in one location and probably just one honey gathering time in the year. As bee farmers, we don't like to miss opportunities. And those opportunities start with oilseed rape in April time generally. And then there's beans, and then there's clover, and then there's the main forage, then there's heather. There's all sorts of things in between, more specialised things as well, growing in specific areas. I'm thinking of some of the fruit areas here. But if you move your bees during the year from flowering crop to flowering crop, it gives them more bites at the cherry. And if you're getting 30, 40, 50 pounds from each of those crops off each colony, but you're moving 3 or 4 or 5 times during the year, then, okay, we're starting to get serious honey crops from these bees because we're not waiting for things to come into flower around our apiary. We're taking our apiary to where things are in flower. So for many of the bee farmers, this migrating around is an important part of their beekeeping. Eventually, like everybody else, liking an easier life, we tend to find the good sites, the good farms, the amenable farmer that will let us keep bees there year round, and there'll probably be something within a field or two. And slowly you develop good permanent sites. But that ability to move and take advantage of a field of beans or a field of oilseed rape is really useful, and it brings the honey in, which keeps the roof over your head, which pays the mortgage. This is some of the more impressive kit that we've seen on our travels that people have for lifting hives, because beekeepers invariably suffer from beekeepers' back. You need to think about what you're doing. You don't suddenly become immune to back trouble because you've got more hives. In fact, you become more vulnerable to it. So if you can think about lifting equipment, these are basically boom loaders with a little electric winch mounted on the end of them that takes all the weight out of lifting the hives, and all you've got to do is position it and press the button for up and down. It makes a hell of a difference to lifting and shifting. I've not yet bought one of these, but I'm going to. We move mostly on trolleys and ramps on and off trailers, which takes a lot of the weight, and all we've got to do is maneuver the hives around. But do be careful, because if you put yourself out of action, who's going to go and look after your bees? Who's going to be there when they're swarming? Everybody else has got their hands full. Okay, let's talk briefly now about the Bee Farmers Association. The association has 3 objectives. The primary, if you like, is to further the interest of bee farmers in the UK. It's to support bee farmers, and it's run by bee farmers for bee farmers. It's promoting the use of the honeybee for the pollination of crops. I don't think anybody in recent years has managed to avoid this connection between insect pollination and food production. And because we can move hives readily, and because we've got 50 or 60,000 insects in those hives, the honeybee is an extremely important part of that pollination mechanism. They can be brought in quantity at the right time. And the third strand is maintaining high standards. Our strapline is the voice of professional beekeeping. We are professional. We do unfortunately pay attention to the boring things like health and safety and environmental health. But wouldn't you want to know that the food that you were selling was produced to standards that you would want to eat yourself? Or vice versa, the stuff that you were buying was produced to your same standards. So we promote high standards. High standards doesn't mean unnecessary fuss and expense. It just means care and clean premises. Now, lots of benefits of membership. We argue endlessly over what the main benefit is. Is it the insurance? Is it the bulk purchase? Is it the networking with other members? Coming together with like-minded beekeepers and saying, how did your bees come through the winter? What have you done to combat this? What are you doing for Varroa on your scale? How do you deal with these things? And that networking is supported through both the Spring Jolly that I talk about and also the regional meetings that happen twice a year around the country. And it's just where we get together and discuss how things are going, share tips. And really, it's a support group, but it's a very important and practical support group. Our insurance policy is robust. The membership of the Bee Farmers Association covers you for £5 million of public liability insurance and £5 million of product liability insurance. So it is good, solid insurance there. You actually can't buy insurance on your own for the price of membership of the Bee Farmers. So sometimes we think that's the primary one. We do all sorts of other things. We used to have a bulletin. It started off as an A4 newsletter however many decades ago. It's now been revamped into a good quality magazine. And it is of information of interest to commercial beekeepers. And alongside it, we issue annually our yearbook and supplier directory. Our yearbook has the name and address and contact details of every member in it. We like to talk to each other. We advertise ourselves to each other so we know who we are, and we ring up and ask about bulk purchases of syrup and things like that. All these things happen cooperatively. And the supplier directory is a listing of companies that members have found that supply all of those niche products or the larger quantities at good prices that you need as a commercial beekeeper. You can't, unfortunately, afford to go to Thorns and buy 300 hives worth of things because the economics just don't work. You have to find other routes of going in and getting that discount. Another thing that we run alongside that is a bulk purchase scheme, where we as the bee farmers negotiate those discounts with suppliers and buy in bulk on your behalf, so you can get jars cheaper, you can get Varroa treatments cheaper, you can get various items of packaging and apiary hardware cheaper, much cheaper than you could buy on the small scale. You also get Beekeepers Quarterly posted out to you as part of the membership. And the last one at the bottom there, sort of hiding at the bottom of the slide, is this new scheme called DASH. And my mind's just gone blank. Disease Accreditation Scheme for Honeybees, I think is what it stands for. It's basically a devolution of foul brood inspection to trained and approved bee farmers. So there is a scheme within the bee farmers where you can apply to be trained effectively to be your own seasonal bee inspector. You get trained, you get assessed, and if you meet the standards, then you are sent off with a piece of paper that says you can be responsible for your own colonies for foul brood. It doesn't mean that the rules change. You still have standstill orders, you still have destruction orders on AFB, you still have limitations on what you can and can't use to treat. But it means that you can incorporate your disease management and your disease inspection into your inspection routine. You still interact with the inspectors. You still get the alerts when there's EFB outbreaks in the area, and you are obliged to fill out return forms if you find anything. Essentially, like anybody else, you're recording it. But all it's doing is it's offloading the work of the inspectors onto the bee farmers. Swings and roundabouts. Some grumble, why aren't we getting the inspectors in to do this? And others say, great, we can do it at our own pace, in with the rest of our management. It's a very good scheme. It's into its second season now, and it seems to be shaping up extremely well. And importantly, nobody seems to be taking the mickey. It seems to be run to the letter and to the spirit of what it is. We run an associate membership scheme. We recognise that there are people that are growing into this. And we do an associate membership, which is half price. It's 50 quid for the year. And it brings you in as a sort of 20 to 40 hive beekeeper. It doesn't give you things like the insurance and access to pollination contracts and the dash scheme and such like. But what it does is it gets you into the important information. You get the Bee Farmer Journal. You get to go along to the meetings and talk to other bee farmers. You get to take advantage of the bulk purchase scheme. So it's trying to give you things that will help you expand if that's what you've got your mind set on. And the associate scheme has been very popular in recent years for people that just want to grow to that level but aren't yet at the 40 hives level. I mentioned the insurance scheme. It covers all sorts of things. This is our big member, Murray, up in Scotland, had some bees in Gloucestershire, and he's the only bee farmer I know of in this country that's used an articulated lorry. Whenever you see bee farming on the news, it's always shots from America, and it's those little four-wheel drive forklift trucks and articulated lorries and bees on pallets. This was a novelty because we ain't ever seen it that big over here. But he had to move several hundred colonies from Gloucestershire up to Scotland for the heather at the end of the season. So it was quite a logistics exercise. But our insurance scheme covers bees in transit. It also covers stock in transit. So if you have an accident while you are migrating your colonies, you're covered. If you have an accident while you're delivering however many 100 jars of honey out to your retailers, you're covered. It's that sort of thing. The scheme is written with commercial beekeeping in mind. We also have other things that you can add on, employers' liability insurance. It's an important concern. Even if you're getting people in just helping in exchange for some honey or something like that, bit of goodwill, everything's fine until somebody drops something heavy on their foot. And then, sometimes the good relations break down there. It's worth having employers' liability insurance because you are employing, even if you don't formally take them on as a member of staff. You're paying them in some form to work with you. And we can add that on to the insurance package. Okay, I've mentioned the pollination scheme a couple of times. It's open to full members of the bee farmers, not the associates, unfortunately. And it is a scheme where we have a pollination officer who contacts growers, and growers contact the pollination officer and say, this is what we've got, this is the acreage, tell us how many bees we need on that, how many colonies of bees, and can you find some beekeepers for us? A pollination secretary maintains a register of members that are part of the pollination scheme, and it's open to any of the full bee farmers members, as I said. And effectively, it's a matching service. A grower here needs this many hives, can you bring them in? Fine, lovely, wonderful. A contract is sorted out, and the bees come in. We also maintain quality control for the growers. The growers don't know anything about bees, and they want to know sometimes that they're not just being given boxes and paying very, very heavily for empty boxes. So our pollination secretary is gamekeeper as well. He goes in and he will inspect the colonies, and he will honestly say whether they are up to scratch for pollination. It has to be seen as honest and professional, and we run the scheme exactly on those lines. One of the great benefits of getting involved in this, though, is that the bee farmers manage the payments. If you've ever done paid pollination with growers, they can be unwilling to part with the money at times. They try and pay as late into the year as they can. Now, all of that financial side is handled by the bee farmers. So you are matched, if you like, with your grower by the bee farmers, and you then get paid by the bee farmers for that. The bee farmers do the chasing of the grower if they're slow to pay. I mentioned earlier on, just on basic top fruit, apple orchards and the like, I don't know what this year's price is, but last year's it was £50 a hive, give or take, for bringing hives in of good strength during that pollination period at the beginning of the year. That's a good boost. As I said, you have to have bees manage to be in a good condition to do that, and they will be inspected, but it can be a good boost to the cash flow at the beginning of the year. Other more specialist crops that require more intensive management of the colonies, or have a greater strain on the colonies if you like, actually pay higher, but those contracts are fewer and further between. I was at one of these spring jolly meetings. They actually came down to see us in Devon to see our new honey farm, and we were at the meeting in the evening when there was an impromptu poll of members. And we worked out from this and from furthering the exercise, this was 4 years ago I think, that about 70% of the bee farmers' members were aged 60 or over. And we said, well, this is an industry in decline. This is not an industry with 20 or 40 years ahead of it. This is an industry that really needs to sort itself out. And we've done that. We've put together, as an organisation, through the hard work of our officers and of our paid staff, we have put together an apprenticeship scheme, generously supported by Rouse and many other people, that's bringing young people into bee farming. It's actually giving them a way in. It's training them as beekeepers. These are some snapshots from their various training exercises. They get a couple of weeks of intensive training during the winter time, and then they're out with bee farmers working. So there's training and there's learning on the job as well. And they're having a whale of a time by all accounts. And we're teaching all of these things. We're giving them a good, solid grounding in bee biology, diseases, botany and forage sources. What is that growing in that field, that little green clump on the ground? Is that going to be something useful in a month's time? Or is it boring? Is it green desert waiting to happen? Is it maize? So we're teaching them all of these things. We're teaching them all about the processing, preparation, even carpentry skills, how to put together and repair your equipment. You know, these are young people. They've maybe not picked up these skills by doing DIY. We're trying to set them up with all of the skills that they might need as a beekeeper to throw them in. And they're going in and being very useful to the businesses that are hosting them as apprentices. The feedback on this is excellent. And we carry on. They're getting a lot of business management advice. You've got to watch the pounds and pence in this game. But they're getting support in that. We are very grateful to all of our sponsors that have helped make the apprenticeship scheme work. A number of logos up there. The one that you won't recognise here is actually the wax chandlers. They have been extremely supportive in getting this off the ground. And all of these organisations have given very generously to make this happen. And we're very grateful to them. I mentioned earlier that we style the bee farmers as being the voice of professional beekeeping. And we go out there and we talk on your behalf. We're members of the UK Honey Association, which represents principally the honey bottlers and packers and importers, of which there are a few. We're members of the European Professional Beekeepers Association. We have a seat on the FERA Government Healthy Bees Forum to make sure that the commercial input is seen there. There's a National Pollinator Strategy Implementation Group to give the commercial beekeeping input to that. Guess what? We do an awful lot of pollination on a national scale. And we have regular meetings with government ministers, and COMBA is the Council of National Beekeeping Associations that represents all of the UK and Irish beekeeping organisations of amateur or professional ilk. So we're talking to all of these people, and unlike some of the organisations which seem just to go out for publicity, the bee farmers are quietly going for substance, making things happen. And some of the recent successes, this There has been money available for DEFRA under the Healthy Bees Plan, which is a 10-year project, been running since 2009, I think it is. And these are some of the successes that we've got out of it. £15,000 support from FERA to extending the apprenticeship scheme to mature entrants. One of the problems, if you like, with our apprenticeship scheme is there's been a lot of people come forward saying, we're interested in this, but I'm 30, I'm 40. I'm thinking of a career change. Can I become an apprentice? And to call it an apprenticeship in the form that we've done it, there are some strict upper age limits. But we're looking into extending that because we recognise there's a lot of people that could come in relatively young, but not in their sort of 18 to 22 bracket, in order to retrain, if you like, as commercial beekeepers. Money come in for operating the apprenticeship scheme. Small amount for educational speakers at meetings, but every little helps. Just gets people along to those meetings, makes it possible for us to get them there. And the DASH scheme, we've got £4,000 in for the administration from our side. So we're quietly negotiating these things and making things happen based on that government funding.